Welcome everyone to our Positive Links Speaker Series session, Management as a Calling, presented by the Center for Positive Organizations at the University of Michigan, Stephen M. Ross School of Business. I'm Sarah Soderstrom, a faculty associate at the center and an associate professor of organizational studies and program in the environment at the University of Michigan. Excited to have you here today. Few notes on the technology that we are using today. During our event, attendees are view-only participants and cannot be seen or heard. We have turned off the chat function and the raise hand features. However, questions can be asked throughout the event using the Q&A feature. Questions will be visible to everyone, and we invite you to upvote questions that resonate with you. Then at the end of the session, we will address a few of your upvoted questions. We've enabled live transcription services for our event. This feature can be turned on or off using the Zoom settings at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, we are recording this event and will post the video on the CPO website as soon as we are able. The Center for Positive Organizations thanks Sanger Leadership Center, Tauber Institute for Global Operations, Samuel Zell and Robert H. Lurie Institute for Entrepreneurial Studies, and Diane and Paul Jones for their sponsorship and support of the 2020 to 2022 Positive Links Speaker Series. We also thank our series promotional partners, Ann Arbor Spark and the Managerial and Organizational Cognition divisions of the Academy of Management. Thank you all. I'd like to now take a moment to introduce our speaker today, Andy Hoffman. Andy is a professor of management and organizations and environment and sustainability here at the University of Michigan, which means he holds joint appointments across both the Stephen M. Ross School of Business and the School for Environment and Sustainability. I could probably spend the next hour talking about Andy's accolades in both the academic research space as well as his engagement around the field, but I wanted to take a few moments connecting to the ideas that I'm excited to hear him talk about today as a bit of my personal journey and how impactful that has been. And I hope amplifying the impact that I hope he'll have on all of you over the next hour. When I started, oh gosh, over 15 years ago now as a graduate student, I think reflecting many interested in this intersection of business and impact and society, I was struggling with my own identity. Who am I? How do I fit? And it was reading one of Andy's first articles and books that I resonated with this idea of this is how you can do it, right? Then a few years later, in a bit of a hero worship moment, I was able to meet Andy at a few of the sessions and realizing that one, he struggled with this himself, and I think embraced and engaged with that struggle as he navigated his career that allowed him to build out a role of mentorship and support for so many of us. And what for me started as this individual lens of here's a person I can look up to, over time I have realized was the way that Andy was contributing to our field. And this exemplifies the way that he looks to the impact that he's making. A few years ago, he won the Distinguished Faculty Award from Organizations in the Natural Environment at Academy of Management. And while this could have been done because of his research impact alone, what really stood out to me in reading the nomination and engaging with that process was the number of leading scholars in our field committed to using business to make our world better, who attributed part of their success to Andy's guidance and mentorship. And now what I love about the work that Andy is doing and will share with us today is how he's bringing that from these one-on-one mentorship spaces to a broader impact in thinking about how can management be a calling, and using his experience over his career to shape a perspective for students, for professionals, for faculty, in really thinking about how each of us can guide our own spaces towards that impact and think about the calling that we may have. So Andy, I am thrilled to be able to have you share this with everyone today, and so look forward to everyone's engagement with this. Welcome, Andy, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Sarah. That was a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. I'm flattered at the words you've offered. I have to regroup for a second to try and collect myself. But It's a pleasure to be here on this very snowy afternoon in Ann Arbor. If you're in Ann Arbor or Southeast Michigan, you know you're looking outside of the blizzard. But from those of you who are in the parts of the country, I hope your weather is a little better. What I want to talk about, this idea of management as a calling, is something that is, as Sarah pointed out, a personal journey. Why do we do what we do? And how can we instill that in others? The message is aimed at students, it's aimed at business professionals, it's aimed at faculty. It's in some ways a critique of the way we practice and teach management today, and a challenge to approach it differently. And so that's the message, that's the focus I want to leave today in these remarks. I want to begin my remarks with two stories. The first one involves this gentleman here. This is Bernie Ebbers, and he was involved in at the time, the largest accounting scandal in US history. He had started WorldCom, built it up to a major corporation, and then it turned out that the books were being faked and the company crashed, and he actually went to jail. He was sentenced to prison for 25 years. And I had just joined the faculty at what was then the Michigan Business School. And I was struck, no one was talking about this. I walked around the halls, no one knew who I was brand new, but no one was talking about this. And I found that very strange. Here was someone who had reached a level that we would hope all our students reach, and now he's going down in disgrace. And I thought that we should be talking about it. Finally, towards the end of the day, I got in an elevator and two senior professors were in front of me. And one turned to the other and said, "What do you think of that sentence of Bernie Ebbers?" And the other one said, "I think it's ridiculous. It's not like he killed somebody." That was in 2005. I still remember that to this day, because it symbolizes for me the extent to which we really don't hold business leaders accountable or responsible for the great power that they have. Maybe he didn't kill people, but he destroyed people's retirement accounts. He destroyed their livelihood. He did a lot of damage to the reputation of business in the world. He did a lot of damage. And I think we need to start to think carefully about the responsibility that comes with the power that business people have. The second story happened 4 years later. And if you're familiar with who this is Fritz Henderson. He was the CEO of General Motors after they were taken over or given the bailout from the federal government. Everyone in the C-suite knew he was a placeholder and he would eventually be shown the door, and many of them knew that they would be shown the door soon. And so they were looking for places to land, and one of them was interviewing for a job at the University of Michigan. And somehow I ended up on his schedule for interviews. And in our conversation, he said something that I still find quite amazing. He said in the middle of the conversation, "You know, I've been at General Motors for 30 years, and I have to tell you, I had a ball." And he said it with a smile on his face. And I thought, wow, he almost presided over the end of a major corporation, and he had a ball. To me, it was kind of like your parent is on the operating table. Your doctor screws up the operation, gets replaced by a different doctor. The doctor comes out and tells you, "You know, I almost killed your mother or father. Someone else had to come and bail me out. But boy, I had a ball in that operation." It's just total disconnect. And to me, it's the extent to which business people themselves don't often hold themselves responsible or accountable for the great power that they have. So I want to open with that with just saying that I'm beginning this with a critique of capitalism as it's presently structured. Don't worry, I'm not going towards socialism. I'm talking about how can we think about amending it? And that's where I'm focusing on the idea of management as a calling and how we approach these issues. I am not alone in questioning capitalism. There are many who think that capitalism is in crisis. Joseph Stiglitz, a Nobel laureate in economics, says capitalism needs to be saved from itself. Paul Pullman, the former CEO of Unilever, says capitalism is a damaged ideology that needs to be reinvented for the 21st century. All the way down the bottom, Andy Grove says this moment in the market's history is a strategic inflection point. A lot of people are starting to look and say something is amiss here. Capitalism is not doing what we'd hoped it'd do, and we need to start to think about amending it. To my mind, there are two sources of this crisis. The crisis in the market's failure in the social environment, and market failure in the natural environment. In the social environment, income inequality is reaching levels that we have not seen in this country since before the Great Depression. And it's happening all over the world. The share of the income that goes to the top 10% in these countries has been growing steadily since 1980. We are not the only country where income inequality is growing. And certainly we're having social inequality as well, evidenced by the Black Lives Matter. That stat on the bottom is the one that just blows me away the most. The wealthiest 26 people in the world now own as many assets as the poorest 3.8 billion people on the planet. Clearly, people are looking and saying, there's something amiss here. Even here, before COVID, these statistics just jump out at me. 40% of Americans were unable to pull together just $400 for emergency. 78% lived paycheck to paycheck. 40% earned about $18,000 per year, and 42% had saved less than $10,000 for retirement. COVID hits. These people are in crisis now at a time where CEO compensation grew at double the pace of ordinary workers' wages, such that the median income right now is $18.6 million. And if you just saw the news today, shareholders at Apple are raising eyebrows over Tim Cook's salary package, which is $99 million. People saying, wait a minute, something's wrong here. And so in the social environment, capitalism is having some problems. They're also having problems in the natural environment, climate change. You can see the growth in CO2 emissions since 1950, steady upward trend. You can see down on the bottom right, the rising frequency of natural disasters. I would like to point out that is not from an environmental nonprofit, that's from Munich Re, a reinsurance company. And up above, a similar chart, insured catastrophe losses and the very uneven and spiky nature of it. Insurance companies, the economic costs, climate change is a major issue that we need to face, and capitalism is struggling with it. CO2 is not the only issue. I can go through any number of environmental issues on the left, whether it's biosphere degradation or domesticated land, stratospheric ozone, surface temperatures, ocean acidification, across the board. The numbers are going up rapidly since 1950. Similarly, on the right, socioeconomic trends. You can look at the population there. And I want to pause on that for 1 second to point out that I was born in 1961. In 1961, there were 3 billion people on Earth. Today, there are 7.5 billion people. I want you to pause for a second and think about that. It took Homo sapiens about 15,000 years, more or less, to go from roughly 0 to 3 billion people. And it took us in the short course of my lifetime, that's more than doubled. And if I live to 2050, I'll see that more than triple to 10 billion people on Earth. Can the environment handle that increasing load? There are going to be serious problems. It's not just the numbers, it's also the rising standard of living, which can be measured by any number of these graphs that are here. So we have these twin crises that capitalism is having trouble dealing with. And to my mind, these represent what Thomas Berry calls the great work. I really love this idea. He says the success or failure of any historic age is the extent to which those living at that time have fulfilled the special role that history has imposed upon them. Is a role given to us beyond any consultation with ourselves we did not choose. We are chosen by some power beyond ourselves of this historic task. The nobility of our lives, however, depends upon the manner in which we come to understand and fulfill our assigned role. So the challenges in the social environment, in the natural environment, these are our great work. These have been imposed upon us. We are faced with them and we have no choice. Young people coming into the workforce now may resent the world that was given to them. Too bad, it's yours, it's ours. And history will judge us by how well we respond to this great challenge. Now, I teach in a business school. And so when I look to the answers and the solutions to this, I go right back to where I see some of the causes. There was a day in this world where the center of power was the church. Then we looked to government. Today, we look to business. The market is the most powerful institution on earth. Business is the most powerful entity within it. You can lament that fact, but it is a fact. And so if business isn't solving these problems, I firmly believe they will not be solved. Business builds the houses and buildings that we live and work in, the forms of mobility we enjoy, the drivetrain under the hood, the alternative mobility that replace it. It provides the food we eat, the clothes we wear. All of it comes from the market. All of it comes from business. And so we need to think about how do we steer business in a direction to solving these problems? How do we amend the capitalism that Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Pullman and others say is broken? It's an interesting time and it's an exciting time because students want it. Students, I find, are asking questions. They're searching for more. Here are two articles that I would encourage you to take a look at, both of them from MBA students. The first one, John Benjamin, he wrote this when he was an MBA student at MIT Sloan School, my alma mater. And he writes that elite business schooling is tailored to promote two types of solutions to the big problems that arise in society, either greater innovation or freer markets. Proposals other than what's essentially more business are brushed aside, and the curriculum stifles discussion of the common good while emphasizing the overriding objective of profit maximization is unquestioned. I wonder how many MBA students out there listening to this would resonate with that sentiment. Similarly, Sam Long wrote this essay in American Affairs, where he pointed out that American business schools produce a business elite dominated by financiers and their squires, presiding over a disordered economy, gutted of both its productive energy and the ability to generate mass posterity. And he was a Harvard Business School grad. So these are pretty strong statements about the state of business education from those who are getting that business education. And if you look at what people want, a recent poll by Gallup in 2019, 97% of business students want a career with purpose. They want to have meaning in their lives. And I find this very interesting. When I first started teaching in business schools, anyone who wanted to change the world, they usually went to schools of government and nonprofit management. I can tell you that when I was doing my PhD in the early 1990s and knocked on doors at the business school, wanting to focus on environmental issues, I had a lot of doors closed saying, what are you doing here? You should be over in a school of public policy. This has no relation to business. That was in the early 1990s. Look at where we are now. It's a dramatic change. In 2019, the Financial Times found a survey that business ethics entered the top 5 most popular subjects for the first time. And nearly 25% of incoming students want a job focused on social impact after graduation, and nearly 50% want to do so later in their lives. So this is the state we're in. Our students want more, and there's a problem. I don't think the curriculum is providing them what they need. For example, we offer a business ethics course. I have no problem with business ethics. I think it's a great idea, but it just seems to me that if you take one course, business ethics, and you drop it into a curriculum that remains unchanged, there's a disconnect here that's not going to really stick. You can bring fully grown MBAs into a classroom and teach Kantian logic, and then they go into their other classes and figure out how to just maximize shareholder value. That becomes problematic. It's not going to stick. Similarly, an MBA oath, wonderful idea, basically an oath to do no harm, much like a doctor takes. A great idea. Is it virtue signaling? Does it really mean anything? It comes at the end of the program. Can we figure out how to teach the program so that the oath means much more? In medical school, that Hippocratic oath can be embedded within the curriculum. How do we embed these ideas within the curriculum? And that leads me to an idea. If you're familiar with the data, information, knowledge, wisdom pyramid, what we do in academia is we take data and we look at relations and we turn it into information. We take that information, look at patterns, and we turn it into knowledge. In my view, academia stops there. And what we need to do is add that final step and understand principles to create wisdom. We need to cultivate wisdom in our students, which means we need to have a set of aspirational values that are embedded within our curriculum, embedded in who we bring as exemplars, who we want our students to imitate, embedded within our donors. I can go across the board, but it has to be part and parcel of the entire curriculum, the entire culture of a business school, with an idea that we want to create students with character, and character breeds wisdom. And that's what we need to do. And it's very, very hard to do. I have a lot of colleagues who say, Andy, we're not equipped to teach values, to teach character and wisdom. And my response is, we already are. I mean, we teach that efficiency is always good. We teach that the shareholder is first. Are there ways that we are teaching values that we'd actually perhaps serve society better by stop teaching and start to move forward? So there's one piece of it. But a second piece, I really like to think of the idea of management as a calling. Our students are coming to us as adults. They do have aspirations in their life. They do have a desire to make a difference in the world. I find this over and over again in my students. And when I talk about the idea of management as a calling or a vocation, Those outside the business school raise an eyebrow. It seems kind of curious to them. The students I talk to, they light up. They really like this idea. And I like this quote from Mark Twain. He says, the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. Now, most of us had no choice. All of us had no choice in that first day. Our parents chose it for us, but all of us have a choice in the second. It doesn't just drop from on high. Discerning a calling is hard work. You have to put some time and energy into it. And that's what I think we need to do, is figure out how to help students discern their calling in management. What I have there is a picture of a cormorant. And the reason I have it there is because an author who I really like, Herbert Shepard, starts one of his papers by saying, are you a cormorant? Now, what he means by this is a cormorant is a bird that's really good at catching fish. So the fisherman knows this, wraps a band around its neck, a rope around its foot, throws it into the water. The fish goes down, the bird goes down, grabs a fish, comes back up. The fisherman takes it because it can't swallow it, puts it in net and throws it back in the water. And all day the bird does what it's really good at, but does it for someone else's purpose. Are you a cormorant? Are you doing what you are really good at for your purpose, for the purpose of your vocation, your calling, your service to society? Or are you doing it for somebody else's? You can put it in bumper sticker format. You can follow your dreams, or someone will gladly pay you to follow theirs. One challenge here is in that book on the right. This came out a couple of years ago, Excellent Sheep. And what the author is pointing out is that our students are excellent. They're very smart, but they're sheep. They're just chasing shiny baubles. They're following what others are telling them to do. And we need to really instill in them, this is their life. And how are they going to drive it? Think about it. I'm on a committee for a scholarship for high school kids to get into college. The company that endows my chair asked me to do this. And I am appalled when I see students submitting resumes starting from the 5th grade. What an awful lesson. Your life can be summed up on a piece of paper to be evaluated by somebody else. We even do it to our kids. What's a question you were asked since when you were very little? What do you want to be when you grow up? Is that really the question? What if I were to say that's the wrong question? What if the question was, what were you meant to be when you're growing up? It creates a different set of processes for thinking this through. One that starts to think about, what kind of legacy do I want to leave? What kind of impact? How do I want to make the world better? So I want to try and really instill in my students the idea of discerning a calling in management and vocation in management. And that can lead us to think about, how do we think about management as we focus on the challenges of our day? And I want to offer you 2 models. I'll walk through them and then I'll wrap up and we'll take some questions. Don't worry about the terminology, but on the left, we frame the challenges, the great work that I described, merely as a market shift. You translate it into existing business considerations. On the right, we question the system in which we practice our craft, market, capitalism, and try and think about students. On the left, business is reactive. On the right, business is proactive. The left will help students get a job. The right will help them set a vision for tomorrow's markets to realize their vocation. Let me walk through these really quickly just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about, to highlight the difference and where I'd like to see our students go. When I think about sustainability as a market shift, business addressing these problems, I treat it like any one of these kinds of challenges. You'd be surprised how many of our undergrads have never seen that device in the middle left, a typewriter, and all of them know the device on the right, a computer. I asked students, how many people have heard of Smith Corona or Brother or IBM? And they all light up, they know IBM. They've never heard of Smith Corona or Brother. And the challenges we face, climate change, income inequality, they can actually create the same kind of effect of businesses failing to see the market shift and going into demise. We can look at the device on the bottom, the Walkman. That was my personal music system when I was growing up. Many students have never seen one, much less touched a cassette tape, or even worse, an 8-track tape. And on the right, the iPod. The iPod changes our culture. We understand that. We take it for granted. How many people have actually read the user's manual on iPod? I'll bet I'm getting a lot of smirks right now. NPR did a funny story a number of years ago. They took a 13-year-old boy, they took away his iPod, they gave him a Walkman and said, make this your music system for the week. At the end of the week, they asked him how to go. And he said, it wasn't until halfway through the week I realized I had to take the cassette tape out, turn it over, put it back in order to make it work, to hear the other side. And yet the iPod is intuitive. So when we frame our sustainability challenges as a market shift, we can ask 3 questions. Who is driving it? What department will handle it internally? What frame best explains the business imperative? Let me go through these quickly. Who is driving it? You can take climate change, you can take income inequality and just connect it to a constituent the business already knows. Any one of these up here, whether it's coercive drivers in the regulatory environment, resource drivers in the supply chain, market drivers and your consumers, social drivers, academia. Students coming out now care about this stuff. Companies know they have to attend to it. What department will handle it internally? This is a very important question because how it's framed is represented by where it's dropped. Is it in community relations? Is it in operational efficiency, operations? Is it in accounting? Is it in strategic planning? You can see it moves from the periphery to the core. And I think about the curriculum in the same way. We have to move this from the periphery to the core, because at the end, what frame best explains the business imperative? And so when we talk about income inequality, when we talk about climate change, we could be talking about cost of capital, consumer demand, corporate reputation, insurance risk management. You put it into language that the company already knows, and it gets translated in something they can handle. I've done a lot of work with Whirlpool. They say we don't talk about climate change at all. We talk about energy efficiency. We talk about consumer demand, consumers caring about this, and it starts to make sense. If you're in a company like Procter & Gamble, you better connect it to consumer demand and new product development. If you're in Walmart, you better connect it to operational efficiency and supply chain logistics. You frame it in the language that the people in the business already know, and then you can get some traction. So here are some market shifts that work for business. And I find this very interesting. A lot of business schools have announced recently that they're bringing sustainability into the core, and this is great. They're looking at market opportunity. Incandescent light bulbs. Should you invest in incandescent light bulbs? No. Should you invest in compact fluorescents? Maybe. Should you invest in LEDs? Definitely. And that's the shift in the lighting sector. Now, this to me is the typewriter story, because the technology to make an incandescent is the same as to make a CFL. You run electricity through a gas or a filament, and it creates light. LEDs are solid state technology, a different capacity, a different capability, and companies have had to make a transition and develop new capabilities to do it. Some left the market. Some decided they couldn't make the transition. Others stayed in. I can go through any number of these shifts. These are all driven in part by connecting sustainability to core business issues. But I want to point out that there's a but here. There's a problem. And I want to ask you, you're all very smart people, to follow F. Scott Fitzgerald's idea here. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold 2 opposing ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. Everything I just told you, bring sustainability in, bring climate change, income inequality into the curriculum, into the core as market opportunity, that's great, but it's not enough. The electric car is great. The Tesla's a great car, but the answer to climate change is not another car. The answer to climate change is to rethink mobility. I can go through many examples, and I will, that what we're facing right now is a major challenge that goes beyond just a sustainable hotel or sustainable food. It really goes to the core of business. I have found myself in my own work moving away from the word sustainability. I feel like it gets categorized as something that's handled by people over there. And we need to start to think about the system in which we operate, because the truth is the problems of income inequality, the problems of climate change are systemic breakdowns. They're embedded within the system. You can't solve them if you don't change the system. Thomas Piketty on income inequality made this clear in his book, Capital, that income inequality is endemic into the capitalist system we have. And on environmental issues, climate change is just one marker of what scientists are calling the Anthropocene. We've left the Holocene, we've entered a new geological epoch called the Anthropocene, the age of humans. This is a massive shift, and there are other shifts as well. Nitrogen cycle, the green zone in the center of that diagram is the safe zone. These boundaries that we should stay within the green in order to maintain a safe operating system for humans and other life forms. We've crossed on climate change. We've crossed on nitrogen. We produce more fixed nitrogen than natural processes. That goes into our farm fields. It goes into our rivers and lakes. It causes algae blooms. It feeds into the Mississippi River. It dumps into the Gulf of Mexico. The mouth of the Mississippi River is a dead zone because of all the nitrogen. And then look at biodiversity loss. That is at astronomical rates. Scientists describe we're in the 6th mass extinction. They've recently updated this chart, chemical pollution. They have now calculated as being outside the safe zone as well. All of these represent ways in which we are altering the natural environment that in ways that are unprecedented. Let me put it this way. I like to think about it this way, because this is not a philosophical statement. This is actually has to be shown within the geological strata of the earth that we have changed it. So think about it this way. If humans all died today, and 1,000 years from now, archaeologists from some future civilization started to dig, they would find a layer and they would say, well, what happened here? Well, what happened here is humans. They would find plastics. Somebody suggested it should be called the Plasticine. They would find radioactive isotopes. They would find a species die-off that is of epic proportions. This is the marker we're leaving on Earth. Stephen Jay Gould captures the challenge quite nicely when he wrote, "We have become, by the power of glorious evolutionary accident called intelligence, the stewards of life's continuity on Earth. We do not ask for this role, but we cannot abjure it. We may not be suited to it, but here we are." And here's my hook. We got into this by accident. Capitalism brought us here. Some of you have suggested it should be called the Capitalist. And capitalism is going to have to get us out, but it has to be an amended capitalism. It has to be an altered capitalism. This is what students are looking for. This is what students are anxious for, is how can I use the power of business to solve these challenges that business has created in the first place? There's the challenge. And so we need to have systemic solutions. We need to think systemically. Inserting a sustainability case into a core course without changing the curriculum, it just won't work, because we have to think overall. We have to move from reducing unsustainability to creating sustainability, from doing less bad to doing good. And that's a totally different thought process. Think about it this way. In Iraq, we stopped the war. That's a very different process than creating peace, a totally different approach. I could think about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but if you want to think about going carbon neutral or carbon negative, a totally different approach, a totally different set of logics to try and think this through. How might we think them in the core or in the curriculum at a business school? Well, number one, how do we start to teach students how to become stewards of the market? Well, we need to teach them what capitalism is. What was its original ideas? How has it evolved? What are the multiple forms that are out there? Japanese capitalism is very different than American capitalism, very different than Swedish capitalism. How do we start to understand the different forms? How do we understand how to make amendments in the form of capitalism we enjoy right now in order to solve it? A data point to show you that students are hungry for this content. I'm about to offer a course for the first time in Winter B called Reexamining Capitalism, where I'm going to try and do this with my students. It's Winter B. It's probably the worst quarter in the entire 2 years that students are going to be here, because the first years can't take it. They're doing math. Second years are on a glide path to go to graduation. I posted the course. They had a title and a paragraph. I hadn't even created the syllabus yet. And to my astonishment, 72 students filled the cap very quickly, and a 36-person waiting list. Students are hungry for this content. So how do we teach students how to be stewards of the market? How do we start to re-examine what is the purpose of the firm? I could walk up at any student or any person right now and say, finish the sentence. The purpose of the firm is to, and they will parrot back, make money for the shareholder. But that is being questioned now. Whether it's Larry Fink at BlackRock, the Business Roundtable, the World Economic Forum, all of them are coming out and challenging, re-examining the purpose of the corporation. Now, this isn't an answer by itself. There are plenty of studies to show, particularly the Business Roundtable, that the companies in the Business Roundtable have not done a whole lot to operationalize that. Larry Fink is going a little further with BlackRock, but the conversation's been engaged. And if it's a very important question to start to rethink, what is the purpose of the corporation? I like to go back to Peter Drucker, who said the purpose of the corporation is to identify and serve a market. How it makes money is a measure of how well it does that. But in the end, the purpose of the corporation is measured by how well it serves society. We've seemed to lost that, and we need to bring it back. What is the role of government in the market? What is the role of business and policy making? I am stunned how many of our students think that government has no role in the market, and regulation is an unwarranted intrusion in the market. And a second course I've begun offering, it's the second offering, I just finished it today, called Business and Democracy, Advocacy, Lobbying, and the Public Interest, and is joint between the Ford School of Public Policy and the Ross School of Business. Again, it filled up. The students are really hungry for this content. This gives me hope. This gets me excited. We have to start to rethink material use. This can go into the operations class. We can start to think about circular economies. How do we draw less from the environment? Business models to do this. The business Gordian knot. How do we separate economic growth from energy use or material use? How do we start to think about carbon neutrality or carbon negative? How do we start to think about autonomous mobility? How that changes so many other things in our society. If we come to a world, and I'm pretty sure we will, where people will call up a car on their cell phone, it will pick them up and take them where they need to go. How many cars do we need? I'll tell you, that shift is already happening. I'll tell my undergrad students in particular that I love cars. I do. I got a license the first day I could, got a car the first day I could, and they look at me like I've got 3 heads. Who would love a car? Why would you love a car? They look at it as a utilitarian object, and they would love to be free of it, rid of it. And so if we call up cars on our cell phone, how many cars do we need on the road? Right now, 95, and at any time, 95% of the fleet is sitting idle. It's a wasted asset. So do we just need peak demand? What is that number? Interesting question. What will happen to the number of roads we have? What will happen to the parking garages we have? What will happen to that garage behind my house? You can kiss that neighborhood gas station goodbye. All these things are going to change, and they're going to change through the market. Here's the real tough challenge. How do we think about a future capitalism where we tackle the issue of consumption? Is there such thing as sustainable consumption? Can you make money by not providing people with more stuff, but providing the services that they need? And can we think about degrowth? If growth is connected to material and energy, the simple fact is you cannot have endless growth. It's just not possible. And so how do we think about different conceptions of growth? We can go through some of the metrics that we teach. GDP. GDP measures the movement of any kind of money, whether it's good or bad. I could start my day eating Krispy Kreme donuts, have my lunch at McDonald's. GDP goes up. I have a heart attack. GDP goes up because I go to the hospital. I die. I have and my family pays for a funeral and I'm put in the ground, and GDP goes up once again. GDP doesn't make a distinction between good and bad. And Nicolas Sarkozy, when he was president of France, commissioned Joseph Stiglitz and Amartya Sen to examine GDP, and are there better metrics we can have to measure national economic health? Really interesting question. We can go through the idea of discount rates. Discount rates have their place, but Nicholas Stern stirred a healthy debate on this question when he calculated the costs of climate change, and he used an extremely low discount rate. And economists hammered him, and he said, you know, there are some places where using discount rates are socially immoral. And so, for example, a 10% discount rate, just straight line, that says that everything out 10 years out and beyond is worthless. Is that true? That's my students' future. That's young people's future. And they are pushing back and saying, maybe we should rethink this. And so reconsider some of the metrics and bring in new kinds of metrics, the sustainable development goals. I know that Erasmus in Rotterdam has hooked their entire MBA around the sustainable development goals. There are changes going on. How do we rethink business competition and collaboration? Paul Pullman, after he stepped down from Unilever, created something called Imagine, built around something called pre-competitive collaboration. And his idea is, if we have market sectors with tight market concentration, what happens if we get that small number of CEOs in a room together, their antitrust lawyers standing right behind them, ready to gag them if they talk about money, but could they come together and say, let's do something on palm oil or fair wage or climate change, and get the sector to move? A, that will get others to follow. B, it will make policy easier to set. Is this a way we can start to rethink the constant drumbeat of competition that is embedded within the MBA curriculum? Dominate your competition, market competition, competitive strategy. It's all around the idea of conquering. And how do we start to think about ways that we can collaborate to solve the problems that we face? Now, system change is underway and will continue. I mean, 2 sectors where I expect to see massive change before I die, and certainly my students are going to see changes that are going to be really hard to imagine. But the automotive sector. I mean, if you told me 20 years ago someone was going to enter the auto sector, I would have been very incredulous. The upfront costs would just been too high. And yet, look at this. Tesla's market cap over $1 trillion, more than 10 times that of General Motors and Ford. And Rivian just had their IPO. They're valued around $80 billion. They had some problems recently, but clearly the market thinks electrics are the future. And then right behind that is autonomous vehicles. And that is the major systems change of rethinking the idea of selling a car, making a profit by pushing steel, to making a profit by selling the service. And I know that folks at Ford and other companies are really trying to figure this out. What does an auto company look like when you're providing the service? There's the systems change. And then systems change within the energy sector. The top three there are renewable energy companies. Look at that slope of that line for their market cap. And then on the bottom are the oil majors. And look at the market caps. They're starting to rival. Now, what is the future of those companies on the bottom? If you saw recently, Third Point, an activist investor in Royal Dutch Shell, has proposed that the company break in two, and that they take a renewable piece as the future and fossil fuel piece as the past, and they start to slowly sunset one while redeploying assets in the other. It's a very interesting question. If you're in the oil sector right now, you are starting to look and say, what does the future look like in a climate change world where fossil fuels cannot be burned? The valuation of these companies is based to a large extent on the proven reserves underground. And we can put nation states in there as well, because when we talk about Russia, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, the oil under the ground is part of the valuation. How do we transition away from that kind of a scenario? Very, very difficult challenge, because again, it's systemically connected. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have fossil fuels within your investment portfolio. How do we start to think about a controlled, a careful, an orderly transition? This is not going to be easy. And any sector right now is really trying to figure out how to deal with climate change, whether it's tourism or beverages. I have a personal game. Whenever I meet someone who's making money off the land, I say, do you see climate change? And they all say the same thing. They say, absolutely. They see either, yep, that's climate change. I'm looking at it. I'm irrigating fields I never irrigated before. I'm seeing pests I never saw before. I'm growing crops I never grew before. I can't grow species I used to grow. Or they also say, you know, I'm not ready to use that word climate change, but something strange is going on here. I've never seen anything like this. They're all seeing the effects. And so they're trying to figure out how to adapt, how to mitigate, and importantly, how to find business opportunity. This is where the students are. This is what the students want to jump on and try and help businesses solve these problems, both for their own business line, but also for society. And this gives me hope. So I want to close with just one thought to provoke you. I want to show you a picture of my grandmother. Trust me, I'm going someplace with this. This is my grandmother, was born in 1899. She died in 1995. And I remember thinking about this at her funeral, and I want you to think about it too. Think about the changes she saw in her life. She saw the advent of indoor plumbing, the advent of indoor electrification, the first car, the first flight, man landed on the moon. She saw all that and more. And if I had told her when she was the age of my undergraduate students, the world she would die in, she'd say, you're crazy. That is never going to happen. And yet it did. And the world that our young students are going to die in is going to be so different than the world today. And I believe the pace of change is even faster. So the changes they will see will dwarf what my grandmother saw. Now, the challenge for our students, and the challenge for us as we teach our students, is not to get them to predict the future. You can't do that. To really encourage them to think about what role do they want to have in making it the world they want it to be. There's the power of business. Business has the power to take the world towards that place we need to go. And we need to instill in students a sense of purpose, a sense of mission, a sense of calling, a sense of vocation to serve society through business. Make money, yes, I'm not arguing against that, but steer the business towards solving these problems. We need to move them from looking at the glass as half empty, and you can look at the economic projections of climate change as being very scary, or you can look at it as the glass half full. And you can see on the right there, the dot-com bubble, that was about $3 trillion of invested capital. The shale boom, about $1 trillion. What's involved in the energy transition before us? Over $150 trillion. There's a lot of market shift that's going to go in play, and it's happening already. Look at the numbers on the bottom left, the amount of jobs in solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, other low carbon technologies, and then look at it from natural gas, coal, and oil. The market is shifting. The students want to be a part of it. They want to drive it even further. There's tremendous opportunity. We just have to turn our students to solving it. That's what I want to see in business education. And the last thing I would say for students that are listening to this, if your education isn't fully giving you this kind of a curriculum, then take control of it, take your classes, look around this vast university, find other courses, find other ways, independent study, organize a conference. You find a way, make the curriculum, make the education what you want it to be, to realize your dream, your vision of what your vocation or your calling in management can be. Thank you very much. I hope I've kept your attention, and I guess we'll turn here to Sarah and Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andy. Proactive to think through all of these aspects, and seeing some of the questions that I look forward to engaging with and hearing your perspective with. And I think you ended a little bit with the prompt to the students. And one of the first questions here is from one of our students, finishing up my MBA, capping it off with your class, so targeting off some post-spring break engagement there. But someone surprised with the lack of integration of many of the issues you've highlighted today in their class experience, and is wondering how you engage with this with other professors, your peers, that in their experience often are spending 10 minutes on the last day of class to talk about issues like sustainability, bias, and other systemic issues.
Yeah. You know, boy, working
starting with a tough one there.
Right? No, it's an important question, because you know, since I started in 1995, the challenge has always been, how do you get into the core? How do you get into the curriculum? And there's no easy answer short of pressure from constituents that care. And I think there's a confluence of factors right now that make this an opportunity. First of all, our peers are doing it. I mean, NYU, Georgetown, IMD, I can go down the list. Schools that are starting to really think seriously about working these issues in. And again, I don't want to frame it as working sustainability in. It sounds like an interest getting jammed into it. I think about it, what's the future of business? What's the future of business practice? That's where I want to hook this. This is where I want to frame it. So if you're in business and you think you need to pay attention to Black Lives Matter, think again. You're missing something very important that's going on in the social environment that comes in through your customers, through your employees, the employees flexing their muscle, challenging companies to take these issues seriously. The world is changing around us. I was talking to Jerry Anderson, CEO of DT Energy. He said, Andy, 2 years ago, investors didn't really ask me about climate change. Today, all of them are. All of them, he says. It's the first question they ask. And so I've never seen so many jobs with the word sustainability in it for our students. The world is changing. And so I'm not here to try and start a social movement, but it's happening. Our students want it. The society wants it. It's going in the workforce. Companies are saying we need more aptitude on these issues. We've got a new dean coming into Ross. There's an opportunity there to start to turn the ship, just to focus on these things. It's no small feat to change the core in a business school. It's a major amount of work and quite tumultuous. So don't think that this is an easy lift. The all-important rankings are always sitting out there, and no dean wants to watch the school drop in the rankings under their watch, so they're going to be attentive to that. But I do think that there's a transition point going on right now where multiple constituencies are pushing at the same time. The ACSB is starting to care about these issues. I can go down the list. I love the question. Be part of it. Get your students to agitate, get alumni to agitate, pressure, social pressure. But all we're doing at the end of the day, we're talking about what is the future of business? What is the future of business education? We're not talking about taking one issue, sustainability, and jamming it in. It just triggers people, oh, this is just woke. And I just hate that term. And I don't like when this gets connected to that.
I think moving a little bit from, or connecting the classroom to practice, and the questions here is, thinking about adopting sustainability, thinking about adopting market transformation by businesses often revolves around what competition is doing. But how do you go through this tension between a competition and then businesses needing to come together to solve different aspects of the problems?
Yeah. I mean, there are places where you compete and there are places where you can collaborate. And I feel that our education focuses more on the former and less on the latter. Even within the business environment, more focus on the former. And let's face it, a lot of discomfort with the idea of collaboration. What do people first think? They think collusion. And it's a very real concern. But are there places where we can start to think about how to do this? I mean, think about some of the challenges. How do you teach collaboration in a business setting? That's a whole new area that I don't see a lot of action on. How do we teach students how to sunset an industry? We're not teaching that. But if we're going to look at the demise of the fossil fuel sector done in a responsible way, how do we teach that? And so there are many things within the curriculum that just focus on one piece of the equation: conquering markets, beating your competitor, increasing market share. And that's an important part of the equation. Companies need to make money. Company that doesn't make money can't be very sustainable. But how do we think about turning all that energy, all that power within the market towards solving these problems? Sometimes competition is good. Joseph Schumpeter and his ideas of creative destruction, they have their place. But are there places where we can also think about collaboration to have more, perhaps more conscious destruction, therefore steering the market where it needs to go?
I think in kind of connection with that, one of the things in the questions referring specifically to your reference in the automotive industry, but one of the things seeing there is the rise in market share of companies manufacturing the electric cars. But how do we decouple a different version from kind of this individualistic consumerism with a broader kind of, in this case, facade, but in ideals of sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, my generation looks at a car as a representation of their identity. That's what we do. And I have a couple of classic cars, I'll admit it. We're all complicated individuals. I went to a faculty dinner, and I won't use his name, but I drove a 1960 MG to this dinner, which I think is a piece of art on wheels. I really do. And one of my colleagues, Sarah, you know him, just walked up to me. He's just scratching his head going, "Andy, can you explain this to me?" And I was like, "By your question, no, I don't think I can." And so I think that shift is already in play. I mean, do people in an urban center want to own a car? Not likely. I mean, parking is murder. Insurance is expensive. You just want to be able to get from point A to point B. And our younger people look at it that way. Car is a utilitarian device. So it's really around culture shift, a culture change. I look at a car, I see something, they look at a car, they see something totally different. And I see young people are actually not afraid at the idea of getting into a driverless car, an autonomous car. And my generation is kind of scared of that idea. And I like to point out that when autonomous elevators were first introduced, people are afraid to get in them. Or take a look, there are videos on YouTube, you can find them when they first introduced escalators. You had to have people help people on and help people off. These kinds of changes are happening all the time. I love the history of Alexander Graham Bell. He put up telephone poles and people were horrified. They started to cut them down. Mayors ran on campaigns saying, "We will take down telephone poles." They had campaigns on this. He had to hire Pinkerton guards to protect the telephone poles. And now we have it taken for granted as a part of the landscape. That's the market shifting, the market evolving. So can we expect people to move into autonomous vehicles and start to grow less attached to automobiles? Yes. Are there elements of that make me sad? Yes. I mean, classic cars I think are beautiful. Are there answers coming about? Yes. I mean, Concourse One up in Troy, if you're not familiar with it, go check it out. It's a private track for people with classic cars. I heard a presentation by the guy who started it. He went to investors and they said, "You're crazy." He developed it, has parking garages that you can buy into to park your cars, and he sold them out, and now they're flipping for more than he sold them for. and he's going to try and do it again. Where are we going with this? I don't know. That's the exciting thing about this. The future is so uncertain, but the business is right in the center of it. And there's so many other areas we could talk about. We talk about food. I mean, as we reach 10 billion people, can everyone have a steak every night? No. People are already starting to freak out. Oh, those people want to take away my hamburger, but this is a simple fact. This is a pragmatic reality. What was one of the best IPOs in 2019? It was Impossible Burger, vegetable-based protein. What's right behind that? Insect-based protein. And I'm sure a lot of people are squirming right now, but you can buy crickets right now. There are cricket farms, viable profit-making entities, and they're growing. You can buy cricket powder, think seitan or tofu. And I like to point out to people that sushi entered the American market in 1982, and people were disgusted. Raw fish, are you crazy? And now it's a delicacy. I mean, we do adjust, we do evolve, we do change. We change in our culture. That's the key, is the connection with the market and the culture. Our culture is changing. It will change around cars. It already is changing around cars.
As the parent of 2 teenagers, the idea of autonomous vehicles is sounding more comfortable all the time as they move into driving themselves. One of the other questions is really thinking about the, I think, role of impact, the impact of business on society, and particularly with uplifting low-income communities, in ways to think about these connections locally, both being a part of the communities and helping, but from a revitalization and development space, and would be interested in ways that you've seen that.
Yeah, I mean, the justice components of these transitions can't be ignored. Electrics cost more. So how do we make a transition that's fair and just? Has to be part of these equations. And I would add, how much do we teach business students how to think about justice in market transitions, justice in the development of their business models? We just don't. And yet this is a reality of the world they're entering, and we need to start to think carefully about how to bring that in. I think that's terribly important. And so will all countries go autonomous? Do all countries have the same burden when it comes to addressing climate change? No. Developing countries that are just trying to put food on the table for their people, should they be expected to reduce their carbon emissions? No. And so there has to be a varied response, a differentiated response, with a recognition that there will be a varied and differentiated adoption of these products. Autonomous vehicles. Are you going to have autonomous, are farmers going to want autonomous vehicles? Believe it or not, in some cases, yes, in some cases, no. We're already moving towards, for example, autonomous combines that will use GPS tracking and clear a field. My stepfather, my wife's stepfather is a farmer, and he laments that future. They're already talking about autonomous ships that takes jobs out of the pockets of, or jobs away from people. Who's going to be affected by autonomous vehicles? Taxi drivers, truck drivers. So we have to think about the transitions here, and we have to think about the equity of it. And we have to think about serving communities that are impacted. Joe Manchin is really struggling to figure out how to handle coal mining towns in West Virginia that are getting decimated by the transition away from coal. Can we ignore that and simply say, not the market's problem? I don't think so. So how do we teach students how to think about the equity considerations in the shifting markets of which they're a part and they are driving?
Thanks, Sandy. I know we're all likely left with more questions than we have time to answer, so I want to just wrap up by thanking you for joining us today, for sharing these provocative thoughts, and hopefully leaving us with some inspiration as we move forward. I want to thank everyone else for joining as well. Appreciate the Q&A and hope to see many of you for ongoing conversations. I wanted to remind you that we will email all of you early next week with the video and any resources that are shared. And also let you know that our next Positive Links session features Sue Ashford talking about her book, The Power of Flexing, Growing into Your Best Self. And that will take place virtually on Tuesday, March 15th from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern. It's a fantastic book. I look forward to another incredible talk and hope that you can join us then. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe for anyone on the roads, and enjoy your evening. Thanks.
Thank you very much.